Welcome to the Wicked Game Podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be taking a look at some of my gaming favourites. I don't necessarily mean just the games themselves, the games consoles, but all sorts of media and content with regards to video games. We're going to be exploring that and the reasons why I set up this podcast in the first place. Just a bit of context, bit of background info. I think it might be really interesting to explore that so you get to know me a little bit better and the reasons for this podcast. We'll also be taking a look at all of the latest rumours and news as always, and starting off with what we have been playing. So without further ado, let's crack on. This week has been a really bitty week in gaming for me. I've played quite a few games, but none of them for a particularly long period of time. To start off with, I was playing a little bit more of Super Mario 3D Land, as I mentioned in the last episode. Not terribly interesting, so I'm not going to talk much about that. I've also been dabbling a little bit in the new Dynasty Warriors game. Do you call it Dynasty Warriors or Dynasty Warriors? I can never remember which one it should be, and I don't know if there's a regional country focus on that or whether it's just people's preference. Dynasty Warriors, Dynasty Warriors. Anyway, Dynasty Warriors Origins has just been released a couple of weeks ago here in the UK on the PS5. First time I played a Dynasty Warriors game, actually. I've obviously experimented a little bit with them in the past in the different Warriors games. And in particular, I do remember these games, and a friend of mine had one of these games on I think it was the PS2 back in the day, but I've never actually purchased and properly sat down and played one of these games myself. Having said that, the trailer looked really interesting for this game. I also really wanted to sort of pick up a game this year, early on in this year, that would almost get forgotten about as we head towards some of the huge games that are likely to be released this year. And I really wanted there to be one game that I could say at the end of it as we head towards the Game Awards and say to people, you know, that one got missed off the list. That is a really good game. People missed that back in January, and that actually should be the game of the year. I'm not sure, though, that Dynasty Warriors Origins actually fits into that category. However, played it a little bit, somewhat enjoyable. I've not really, fallen in love with it, though, as I expected to. Positives, gameplay, the combat is obviously quite fun. There's always something very satisfying about taking on thousands of enemies at a time. And the music absolutely slaps. So for the majority of the game, when you're outside of combat, the music is very, orchestral, very similar to the likes of, Final Fantasy and things like that. But then in the combat, they introduce these electric guitars, and it absolutely slaps. I definitely recommend listening to the soundtrack if it's available and you're not going to play this game. So I'm not sure whether I'm going to stick with this game or not. We've got quite a busy gaming year ahead of us, of course. Maybe this is something that falls off my list and I don't return to, which is a shame. As I say, I really wanted this to be one of those games that kind of flies under the radar, but then later on in the year I kind of go, everybody missed that game, it was great, that should be nominated for Game of the Year, and have a different game that I bring to the table rather than all the obvious ones that I'm sure will be discussed later in the year. So that's what I've been playing on PS5. I also dabbled very briefly on the Nintendo Switch this week. I downloaded a game for the whopping sum of 99p here in the UK. I purchased Euro Truck Driver Simulator or Truck Simulator Europe. I basically, on last Sunday night, I really just wanted a game that I could turn off my brain for and just, have a bit of fun and relax a little bit. So I saw a recommendation on Reddit that's the truck driver simulator games are pretty good for this. So I downloaded the cheapest one that I could find, which was the Euro one for 99 pence. Absolute bargain. And I booted it up, and do you know what? I didn't actually like it. It didn't calm me down at all. It didn't relax me. I found it a little bit frustrating. The camera angle, rather than being slightly above or over the shoulder in some respects of the truck, is either too far above, almost like a bird's eye view of the truck, or inside of it in the kind of first person behind the wheel view. And neither of them felt very comfortable to me. I felt like I needed, as I say, more of a slightly above the front of the truck view. And then I found the controls quite fiddly, and it wasn't just driving at all. there's a little bit more to it than that. So I fell off that game very quickly. I also started this week on the Nintendo 3DS Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, I believe it's called. Obviously, the new Monster Hunter game is due out later this month or later next month in February. And I kind of wanted to delve back into this franchise and see where my interest laid, what I could remember from the franchise. I've not really played Monster Hunter much in the past. I've kind of dipped in and out of it, which I think is quite common. I read on Reddit quite a few people saying it's the sort of game where people do come back to it, try it, don't like it, come back to it a few years later, and then it suddenly clicks. And I've done that before with a couple of the previous games in the franchise. So I thought I'd try it again with this one on the 3DS, Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. And so far, a few hours in, I'm really enjoying it actually. I put more hours into this so far than any other Monster Hunter game. So hopefully this will get me excited for the new Monster Hunter game that's coming very shortly, which I look forward to at the end of February. I'm also very tempted, looking over at my game shelf, to pick up and play Fire Emblem Warriors on the Nintendo 3DS. It's one of the few games that was specifically released for the new Nintendo 3DS, so it can use the C stick, is that what they call it, on the new Nintendo 3DS. I'm really tempted to pick that up and play that, since I've been delving a little bit into obviously the Warriors franchise this week. However, it's still in its original cellophane packaging. I'm not sure I want to break that seal, but I'm very tempted to pick that up this week. As I say, it's been a little bit of a bitty week this week. Last week, of course, I was finishing up with Alan Wake 2, and I'm kind of looking for something else to get my teeth into at the moment. I know it's going to be a busy few months ahead of us with some of the other major gaming releases. However, I feel like there's a little bit of a gap for me now, unfortunately, because I'm so busy at work. It's not like I can sit down and really dedicate a lot of time to it, which is why I'm ending up, I think, experimenting a little bit with some of these handhold titles. But there's kind of two big games that are kind of on my bucket list at the moment, or on my backlog at the moment, that I really need to get to, and hopefully I can do it before it starts to get too busy, and that is Ghost of Tsushima and God of War Ragnarok. Can you believe it? I've never played either of these games. Obviously, I played the first God of War, or the 2018 God of War. Absolutely loved it. I'd call it definitely a 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 sort of game. And I've been waiting for Ragnarok to appear on the PS Plus catalogue, which it now has, which is fantastic. I just wish I had some time to sit down and play it. And obviously, Ghost of Tsushima is a little bit of a bigger responsibility. It takes up a lot more time. Well, so I think anyway, I imagine it's a 50 plus hour sort of affair. And so I really want to be able to find some time to dedicate towards that, particularly as Ghost of Yotei is coming out this year. So I'll try and find time for that over the next few weeks, but we'll see. I've also been reading again this week. I know it's becoming a terrible habit when I should be gaming more. I have a 4-hour round commute that I take to and from the office when I'm working in the office, usually 2, 3, 4 days a week. And so sometimes I'm too tired, or it's too busy for me to play my Switch or 3DS or whatever. So I will often read instead. And this week I have been reading the Witcher book, actually, the first one, The Last Wish, I think it's called. As I understand it, I think this is obviously a long-running franchise and book series. And I don't think this is technically the book that was published first, but I think it's the book that often people will say you should read it first. And it's a bit like a collection of short stories about the Witcher, obviously, and Geralt, the Witcher. And yeah, it's pretty good, actually. I'm really enjoying it. Each chapter or each short story in this collection is a bit like a side quest of a game, and it makes me really want to play the Witcher 3, and I've been tempted to download that or re-download that and jump back into that game. But of course I've got to hold off the temptation because there's a lot going on this year. But yeah, really enjoying it so far. I think I'm about halfway through the book. Really quite atmospheric. Really, if you're into Lord of the Rings or any sort of this sort of fantasy sort of fiction, then I really would recommend this book. And of course, do let me know down below in the comment section what you've been playing this week. Have you got any recommendations for me? Should I sack off Ragnarok and Ghost of Tsushima and focus on something else? Is there a better truck simulator game out there that I should be trying? Do let me know. For now, let's delve into the main agenda item for today, our gaming favourites. As you know, this is a relatively new podcast, so I wanted to take a moment and record an episode for you to get to know me a little bit better, to find out more about the gaming content that I enjoy and what I will likely be featuring on this podcast going forward. I'm not just referring to games themselves or the genres or even the consoles necessarily, but more like the content that I consume in the gaming space that I enjoy and that inspires me to record this podcast. So firstly, seeing as this is a podcast, let's talk about some of my favorite gaming podcasts. So firstly, as a bit of a disclaimer, this in no way is an exhaustive list of my gaming favorites. These are just a few that I wanted to pick out and talk about in particular today. So first up on the podcast is the Nintendo Switch UK podcast. I first discovered these guys during the pandemic, and they kept me company during some long runs when we were allowed out of the house for our allotted exercise time during those days, which is it seems like a completely different world compared to now. I have some very fond memories of them getting lost up in discussions whilst dragging myself up and down hills in South London when I was going on some long runs. During such a dark time, it was like I was sat around with mates chatting about video games, and I'll be forever grateful for that podcast. As the name suggests, the Nintendo Switch UK podcast focuses on mainly Nintendo games. It has 3 UK-based guests, and their show focuses on, similar stuff for this, news, rumours, reviews, and discussions about mostly Nintendo games, but not exclusively. In my memory, this is the first ever gaming podcast that I really listened to, that really got me into gaming media outside of actually gaming itself. That was sort of my gateway drug into gaming media content. Another British podcast that's one of my favorites is This Nintendo Life, and again, as the name suggests, this is a Nintendo-focused podcast. The presenters here in This Nintendo Life are just so passionate about Nintendo and video games. It's been lovely over the years as well to grow and see these, I was going to say characters, and in some respects that's what they are, grow over the years and develop as the years have gone by. One of the things that I really like about these two is that they're always recommending Nintendo Switch games or Nintendo games as a whole that aren't in the mainstream, that are some golden nuggets that they recommend. And I've explored so many new unknown games because of their recommendations, and I really do appreciate that. They can be really hilarious at times as well. In the most recent episode, one of the presenters started it off with talking about a story about them pooping, and I just absolutely love toilet humour. I love poop humour, and I really did appreciate that, even if it had nothing to do with video games. It was such a good way to start their podcast. In their most recent episode as well, they also did a game swap. They do this at the start of every year, where they nominate a game for the other one to play that they've never played before, and by the end of the year they have to play it, which I love that as a idea for a podcast. The Triple Jump podcast is also one of my favourites, another British trio here. Triple Jump is a little bit more of a professional setup, and you've probably seen some of their videos that they do on YouTube. They often do a lot of 100 worst games, 100 best games, that sort of thing. A bit more of a professional setup than the previous 2 podcasts that I spoke to. Some of their editorial decisions aren't always to my liking, but it is a solid podcast that is released without a doubt every week. And it was, in fact, my most listened to podcast of 2025, according to Spotify Wrapped, so another one that I would absolutely recommend. Crossing over to stateside now, and we have the Nontendo podcast, not the Nintendo podcast, the Nontendo podcast. This podcast was established, I think it was a couple of years ago now, by YouTube's Beat 'em Ups, aka Wood Hawker. This is one of my favorite podcasts of all time. It's very similar to Wood's YouTube channel, which we'll talk about shortly. Mostly focuses on Nintendo-based content, but occasionally does veer away from that from time to time. The premise of the show is that Wood usually brings on a guest host or his wife and to discuss the latest news and reviews in the Nintendo space for that week. There's a lot of variety to the show. It's really fun and entertaining, and is a necessary listen for anybody who's trying to keep up to date on Nintendo rumours in particular. Honestly, this podcast is better watched on YouTube if you can, because there's quite a lot of physicality to it, and it's better to watch it that way. And sometimes when I listen to it, I don't know what's going on because they're doing stuff in person. And so I would recommend it on YouTube. I'll talk a bit more about Wood and Beat 'em Ups in a couple of minutes when we get onto the YouTube section. And sticking in the US for the time being, we have the Wolf Den podcast. So the Wolf Den podcast is hosted by Bob Wolf and his brother. Bob Wolf actually used to be the co-host of the Nintendo podcast before deciding to step aside from that to focus purely on his own content. If you like talk about emulating software and emulation devices and gaming rumours with a splash of witty banter threaded throughout, then this is the podcast for you. Bob Wolf has one of those weirdly attractive voices, for me anyway, that makes it quite an enjoyable and relaxing sort of podcast, which is a bit weird because I think he has is it like a New Jersey, Queens, New York sort of accent, which I find strangely quite calming and relaxing. But yeah, this is one of those podcasts that is really suited to those who like some of the more technical details when it comes to gaming and emulation and things like that. I have a few honourable mentions. I won't go into a lot of detail here, but just finally on the podcast, I wanted to talk about a podcast that doesn't exist anymore, or at least there hasn't been any recent episodes published in years. It's Hideo Kojima's Brain Structure. So a few years ago, Kojima launched a podcast where he talks a lot about art and music that he loves and inspires him, books, music and films. It's quite similar to his book that I'm reading at the moment, The Creative Gene, where he again talks about all of the arts, music and books and films that inspire him. And of course it's interspersed as well, his podcast, with these musical segments. It's something I've never seen before actually on a podcast. I believe it's a Spotify exclusive podcast, and basically what happens is he'll talk about a band, a musician, or an album that he enjoys, and then Spotify will actually then play the song that comes from that album, which I think is really innovative, and I've never seen that from any podcast before. And so I really hope that Kojima brings it back. In fact, I hope that somebody else also does something similar like this, but particularly Kojima, because it's great to see inside his brain. The episodes also regularly feature guests which Kojima brings on to interview, and it's incredibly charming to see Kojima sort of fanboy over these directors and musicians and filmmakers who he brings on to the podcast. And it's just real pleasure to listen to him fawn over these people and explain why it was so important to him and how this music and this art inspired him to make the games that he's done. I used to listen to this podcast first thing in the morning, actually at 6 a.m. when I was in the gym, and it would equally calm me down and also motivate me to be really productive and creative throughout the day. So I would definitely recommend going back and listening to this podcast, and hopefully Kojima will come back and publish some more episodes soon. Right, I'll do a few honourable mentions now. I'm just scrolling through my Spotify account as I speak. So who else do we have on there? There's the Wicked Game podcast. I hear that is a really good podcast, and I'll definitely recommend Wicked Game to anybody. The What Culture Gaming podcast, very good. Grind My Metal Gears. It's a podcast which, as you can imagine, specializes in Metal Gear, Metal Gear Solid. Basically, this podcast is where a couple of hosts decide to play through the entirety of the Metal Gear franchise, and of course provide commentary throughout their experience. Right, let's head on to the next category now. Talk about YouTubers that I watch and I enjoy. I can't tell you how many hours I spend each week watching these YouTubers, either in bed, falling asleep, on the toilet, on the way to work, wherever. I spend hours each week watching these YouTubers. First up, we have Scott the Woz. The man needs no introduction. So Scott the Woz produces, as many of you know, often long form video essays about different elements of the gaming culture, zeitgeist and history. So for example, I recently listened to or watched one of his episodes today, which talked about the history and the performance of the PS1 Classic. So it was the emulation device that PlayStation launched. Was it in like 2015, 2016, 2017 sort of era, where they produced obviously a mini sort of PlayStation that came preloaded with I think 20 or 25 games. His best work, in my opinion, is his very, very long form video essays about the downfall of the Wii U, which I absolutely adore. 100% recommend. His content is absolutely hilarious as well. 10 out of 10. He's not like a lot of content generators out there who are a bit, douchey and self-involved. Do give him a watch. Next up, we have Beat 'em Up's Woodhawker, who I talked about earlier. Beat 'em Ups is probably my favorite gaming YouTuber, maybe. I talked earlier about how the Nintendo Switch UK podcast was sort of my gateway drug into gaming podcasts, 5 or so years ago. I'd probably say that Beat 'em Ups and Woodhawker were probably my gateway drug into gaming YouTube. His videos often feature game reviews and recommendations, usually focusing, of course, on the Nintendo Switch, but not exclusively. He also does a lot of unboxing and tech reviews, some legitimate and serious ones, and some that are a little bit, obviously, YouTube-y, which is not a surprise considering he is a YouTuber, and those algorithms have got an algorithm at the end of the day. He also does a few gaming news and reaction videos. Mostly they're separate on his second channel, React 'em Ups, which I would also recommend. And then he also does a few personal vlog style content videos as well, some travel vlogs. I'd personally recommend his Japan travel vlog, where he does a lot of gaming hunting over there, and it's really successful and really entertaining. Less so his London gaming hunting vlogs, which is quite comical due to the lack of actual gaming shops there are here in London. As anybody in London like myself will know, we are a little bit starved of gaming shops here. We mostly just have CEX stores, which is a second-hand gaming store and like a pawn shop, essentially, like you'd have in the US, where you can trade in not just games, also different types of tech equipment. But gaming shops themselves, independent gaming stores, there isn't very many of them down here in London or across the UK as a whole, actually. But anyway, I digress. Beat 'em Up's content is, it's lighthearted, it's energetic, it's very entertaining. Would highly recommend. And sticking over in the States, the next YouTuber on my list is Luke Stevens and his side channel, Luke Stevens Live. So Luke Stevens is known for creating in-depth video essays and critiques on video games, primarily focusing on deep dive game analysis. So he has these long form videos where he kind of breaks down the plot of a game and goes over its contents, its mechanics, its design. He also does critiques and reviews of new games, and also a lot of commentary on the gaming industry itself. Notably, he usually goes live most weekdays, and he looks at the gaming news of that day, and then a lot of the content from that then is produced, is then taken and created and put into a single video that then gets published on his main channel, Luke Stevens. His videos are usually really well researched, and offer more of a skeptical take on gaming and the industry, and it's just really entertaining as well as informative. Would definitely recommend. As a whole, I would say that some of the longer form video essays are some of my favorite types of gaming content. My number one go-to after I've finished a game is to go onto YouTube and try and find some form of critique, video essay, retrospective about that game, and try and understand and learn more about the game's mechanics and lore and the work that went into creating that game, but also to relive the positive experiences that I've had, and maybe reconfirm some of the negative aspects that I've experienced of a game as well. I mentioned earlier the Wolf Den podcast. Well, as you can expect, Bob Wolf also has a YouTube channel. His channel focuses more so, I'd say, on the tech reviews and the tech aspect of gaming, particularly with regards to a lot of emulation and handheld devices. So if that's something that you're really interested to, if you are really into somebody stripping apart a old Game Boy and trying to repair it from the ground up, then this is the channel for you. The longer form videos are also really good to fall asleep to. I will often start playing them at night time as I get into bed, and will inevitably fall asleep to them, and then wake up several hours later with a retrospective about Uncharted 4, playing 3 hours into it later. Next up we have Arlo. As many of you probably know, Arlo is a blue Muppet-like character who produces gaming news, reviews, critiques, largely focusing on Nintendo. He's incredibly energetic and very passionate about Nintendo and video games, and often his videos take a nostalgic look at video games consoles and games throughout the years. Some of his content on the Nintendo Switch 2 rumours have been absolutely top-notch, 10 out of 10, would highly recommend. He was really quick off the mark to release videos reacting to the Nintendo Switch 2 as well. I think he was probably the first that I saw. Would really recommend his work. The Happy Console Gamer is also one of my favorites. So this guy releases videos every Sunday evening, which is always a really nice thing to look forward to watching before having to go back to work, of course, on Monday. The Happy Console Gamer usually focuses on news and reviews. Usually he only produces one game a week, and he focuses mainly on a lot of retro titles, but not exclusively. This guy is like super positive. As the name suggests, the Happy Console Gamer, this guy is mostly very positive about the games that he is reviewing and playing, and that's not to say that he's ignoring the negative side of some games and some parts of the industry. It's not at all the case. It's just the fact that he is incredibly passionate about what he does and about gaming, and you can tell that it's completely taken over his entire life, and he's dedicated himself to this, and he's an absolute pleasure to watch. Heading back to the UK now, and first up we have Love Gaming Neutro, who is a London-based gaming YouTuber focusing mostly on PlayStation content. Anton does a lot of top 15 PS5 games of 2025 and those sort of videos, as well as a lot of first impressions and reviews. He also does a fair bit of course, gaming news and updates as well. This chap is incredibly relatable, incredibly positive, and an absolute joy to watch. He will often stream live a couple of days a week, not just gaming but also reacting to the latest gaming news that week as well, and it's definitely become one of my favorites. He's relatively new to, I think, the YouTube quote-unquote scene. I think he first appeared in around about 2022 if my memory is correct, and he's just been grown from strength to strength since then. Would highly recommend. Do check out Love Gaming Neutro. Then heading a little bit further up into the Midlands and to the north of the UK, we have a chap called Kale. So Kale is a YouTuber who is known for some of his other content. I think his fitness content in the past, and he's kind of made a pivot towards, or rather he's diversifying and is now creating a lot of gaming content as well. This chap is well known for his gaming hauls. He is a frequent visitor of the CEX stores that I mentioned earlier. These are second-hand gaming stores littered across the UK and are the best and easiest location to find second-hand games over here. He really rekindled my own passion actually in collecting second-hand and retro gaming titles. Of recent years I've mostly just stuck to modern gaming as most people do. After watching his videos, it made me really want to go to a CEX and start getting my hands on some of the more retro titles. One of the interesting things I find about this and all these videos as a whole and all this content as a whole is how they all strand together to motivate and inspire me. So for example, if it wasn't for the likes of the Nintendo Switch UK podcast and this Nintendo Life podcast and Scott there was, I wouldn't have been interested in picking up a new Nintendo 3DS XL anytime soon. However, I did, and then from watching videos by Kale, who regularly visits these second-hand gaming shops, and then I wouldn't have known that it was how accessible it was to be able to get out there and actually purchase one of these consoles. So combined, they really sort of work together to inspire me and motivate me to expand my gaming horizons. So those are most of my favourites and most frequently watched YouTubers in the gaming sphere. Let me know down below what gaming YouTubers you recommend. I've got some other honourable mentions here. Nathaniel Bandy, Totally Tubular Jonathan, Retro Rebound, Cosmonaut Picture Show, The Critical Drinker / Critical Gamer, and of course the Angry Video Game Nerd. There will be a load of others as well that I regularly watch on the algorithm that I haven't listed, so please don't be offended if I've not listed your favourite. Let me know what I missed down below. Next up, I really wanted to talk very quickly about some of my favourite Twitch streamers or gaming streamers as a whole. This isn't something that I do often. I occasionally will stream myself on Twitch when I feel like it. The problem is though I tend to play in little bitty chunks of an hour or 2 hours here and there, and I don't have a regular schedule, but I do like to occasionally jump onto Twitch and see who's streaming on there. And again, it's another one of those pieces of content that I really like to watch as I fall to sleep at night as well. I find it weirdly relaxing watching people play and talk about video games. So first up we have Night the Undying. So Knight plays a combination of modern and more retro titles. I think the first video that I ever watched of his, or first game that I watched him stream, was the original Metal Gear Solid on PS1, which is always a pleasure to watch somebody play and enjoy that game, I think, for the first time. He also is a big fan of Chrono Trigger, which is as well as I, and sometimes he will jump into that and play that as well, which is incredibly enjoyable. And he usually does a mix of modern titles with some more, I'd say, retro titles, but titles from my childhood, from the the PS1 sort of era, which I find really enjoyable to delve into. He's just a friendly chap. He doesn't have a huge following on Twitch, so I would recommend jumping in there and giving Night the Undying a watch. I also enjoy watching a chap called Pez, who focuses mostly on playing Final Fantasy. He tends to do these Final Fantasy marathons where he starts obviously at the start of Final Fantasy 1 and plays all the Final Fantasy titles up to the most recent, i.e. Final Fantasy, but it wouldn't be Final Fantasy 16 now, it'd be Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. And really enjoyable because we'll get to this later, but Final Fantasy is one of my favorite gaming franchises. But this chap is also just incredibly friendly and very warm, and it's just very easy to watch. I think I'm going to get told off for this. He is based in Australia or New Zealand. He usually goes live when I am starting work in the morning, and occasionally if I'm working from home, I'll have him on in the background to start my day, and it's always quite relaxing. It's just to have somebody play Final Fantasy X in the background whilst I'm working. So I would recommend that. That's Pez, P-E-Z-Z. Then if I'm honest, a lot of the other Twitch streamers I watch are the YouTubers and podcasters that I've just mentioned. I'm just looking through the list of the Twitch streamers that I follow now. So I've got Wolfden, we've already mentioned, Luke Stevens, Triple Jump, Cosmonaut Variety Hour, Beat 'em Ups, Arlo, and there's a few others peppered in there. A lot of the YouTubers that kind of circulate around these people as well, like Scootish and Fried Biscuits and people like that, as well as, of course, Neil Newbin, who plays Asterion in Baldur's Gate 3, which is one of my favourite games. He will occasionally go live and, of course, play Baldur's Gate. As I say, I'm not a huge watcher of Twitch, so please drop me a comment down below and let me know which streamers you think I should check out. Finally, just very quickly, I wanted to talk about some of my favorite game franchises and favorite game genres, so you have an idea of the kind of things that will be appearing in this podcast going forward. First and foremost, as I've mentioned previously, the Final Fantasy series. I've loved this series since I was a kid, when I first picked up a copy of Final Fantasy 7, and then 8, and then 9, and then 10, which absolutely blew my mind. Obviously, the series has, I'd say, trailed off in terms of, would it be fair to say in terms of quality, but of epicness, let's say, over recent years, but still one of my favorite franchises. As a whole, I do enjoy JRPGs and the RPG genres. However, now as somebody in their mid-30s, with a full-time job, I have very little time to give to 90, 100-hour RPGs, which is a shame. One of the reasons actually I quite liked Final Fantasy 16. It was quite fast-paced and didn't require a lot of grinding. Obviously, it wasn't best Final Fantasy out there. I do prefer the older styles, 7 through to 10. However, still very enjoyable game. Love this franchise, and I hope to play more of it in the future. The Metal Gear Solid franchise is another franchise that made me fall in love with gaming, and particularly with storytelling in gaming. 1 through to 3, of course, my personal favourites of the franchise. Really looking forward to MGS Delta being released this year. I will begin that on day 1, and maybe even getting the day off work to play it. We'll see. Yeah, MGS, one of my favourites. Nier Automata, I discovered this game on Xbox Game Pass actually during the pandemic, and what a game to play during a global pandemic. If anybody's ever heard of this game, it's sort of a post-apocalyptic hack and slash game that has a lot of existential themes. Graphics are great, the gameplay's great, the mechanics are great, and the music and atmosphere in this is just 10 out of 10, would highly recommend. In a similar vein, Zelda Breath of the Wild is also one of my favourite games. It's definitely up there in the top 5 greatest open world games of all time. Wasn't as much of a fan as Tears of the Kingdom, to be honest. Breath of the Wild is definitely superior, and it's one of those games that I've sunk hundreds and hundreds of hours into. It's kind of my comfort game when I don't know what to play. When I'm feeling, a little bit sick or a little bit lost, I will just jump into Breath of the Wild and just play around for a bit. Super Mario Wonder. In fact, all of the Super Mario games really in the Super Mario franchise, of course, it's the biggest gaming franchise in the world. Of course, it's one of my favourite franchises. I mentioned Super Mario Wonder in particular because after playing that a couple of years ago, it was around about October, November it came out, wasn't it? October 2023? Yeah. No, it's October 2024. Yeah, if fast became my favourite Super Mario game of all time, it will probably get overtaken by something else again in the years to come. But for the time being, that game is just so wonderful to play. The Last of Us, I was late to The Last of Us. I only played The Last of Us for the first time a couple of years ago. And God, my mind was blown. I hadn't seen any spoilers about this. I didn't know what would happen in this game. I didn't really understand what this game was about. I didn't realise it was a zombie game. And that opening crushed me. It was incredible. What a fantastic game. If I had to say right now what my favourite game is of all time, I'd probably say The Last of Us. Baldur's Gate 3. There's nothing that I can say about Baldur's Gate 3 that hasn't already been said. But mind-blowing. Sunk well over 100 hours into this game. One of my favourites. And I just love to have the time to just play this again and again and again. I can imagine if you're a kid and this is like one of the only games that you have, you could get thousands of hours of content and fun and enjoyment out of this game. And I'm so jealous that I'm not a kid that doesn't have a full-time job and responsibilities and I can't just play this game all day, every day. As you probably expect from some of the things that I've been saying, when I was younger, I definitely preferred those bigger RPG games, those long narrative games. Now I do prefer the shorter narrative single-person games. That's definitely my sort of wheelhouse. I've never been a huge fan of multiplayer games, if I'm honest. Not a huge fan of racing games or fighting games necessarily, although Tekken 3 is one of my favourite games of all time, probably in my top 10. Still play Tekken 3 to this day and still prefer it to the modern Tekken games as well, actually. But yeah, I tend to prefer the modern narrative single player games to anything else. And that's pretty much it for gaming content that I enjoy the most. It's a quick overview of the YouTubers, the podcasters, and the games that I enjoy. In terms of the consoles that I have and I play on, it's mostly the Nintendo Switch, the PlayStation 5, and then I'll delve a little bit into some of the smaller retro handheld titles as well, like DS and 3DS from time to time as well. I also picked up a Miiu Mini Plus, a little emulation device, a couple of years ago, which has been an absolute lifesaver and is great to slide into your pocket and take with you onto the tube. And I don't play much Xbox these days. I did have an Xbox One and I did play a lot of that, so I'm not exactly somebody who will only play PlayStation or Nintendo franchises. No, I also love the Xbox. And it's a shame. We're going to be talking about them a little bit later in the show, but it's a shame what's happening to Xbox at the moment. But I'm not tribal when it comes to that kind of stuff. I don't play PC gaming, but I really, 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 really want to get a Steam Deck. Let me know if you have a Steam Deck and if you'd recommend them. Probably the wrong time to get my hands on one with the Nintendo Switch 2 coming out this year. But I do prefer handheld gaming, particularly at the moment, as I say, when I've got a lot of commuting to do or when I'm very busy and I can just fit in a half an hour or so of gaming before going to bed. And then finally, as trailed earlier, that leads me to answer the question why I decided to launch this podcast. And there's not really a clear answer, really. As you can probably tell from some of the anecdotes that I've made about my lifestyle, I tend to spend as much time, if not more time, consuming gaming media through YouTube and podcasts than I do actually gaming itself, unfortunately, due to the pressures of the modern world and due to having a hectic full-time job and a long commute. Unfortunately, that is the case. But it is the reality nonetheless. And I just wanted to add to that space, to contribute towards that space and to a medium that I really enjoy and I'm really passionate about. And so that is the purpose of this podcast. And it's, hopefully something that I will continue to enjoy and want to continue to contribute to. And I'd like to obviously aim to be able to produce more podcasts more regularly. Appreciate some of these episodes are published sporadically. So hopefully in the future we can get more of a regular schedule in place. And that's it for that segment of the show. Now we will move on to the latest gaming news and rumours. And first up in the news and rumours segment, let's talk about the Xbox situation. I feel so bad for Xbox. I really do. They shouldn't be in a situation where I'm starting to pity them. That is not a good situation for any company to be in. But unfortunately, here we are. One of Xbox key exclusives, Forza Horizon 5, is heading to the PlayStation 5. Yes, another one of the Xbox's exclusives is being shared with other consoles. God, it really is just so unfortunate. We're seeing like this slow burning death of the Xbox right now, and it's not enjoyable to witness. I'm really glad that Forza Horizon 5 is coming to the PS5, and I will be playing it when it does, but this is just such a bad sign for Xbox. I just don't understand how things have gotten so bad for them that they're having to give away all of their exclusives. And obviously we're hearing all of these rumours about exclusives such as Halo coming to the PlayStation and potentially the new Switch as well. It's really just not a good look for them. As we all know, like several years ago, Xbox invested a considerable amount, I think billions, in buying up all of these developers and all of these IPs, and they've seemingly done nothing with this investment. And I just don't understand why they aren't producing good quality exclusive games that should be bringing people to the Xbox. But unfortunately, this is just not the case. And I think they're only making matters worse as well with their sort of mixed messaging. Recently, they've tried to rebrand the Xbox as everything is an Xbox. You know, your computer's an Xbox, your phone's an Xbox, your tablet's an Xbox, essentially because everything can access Game Pass on, which is great for, you know, trying to attract new customers to Xbox titles in some respects. But it also means that nobody therefore requires or wants to purchase an Xbox Series X or S. And there's just no incentive to at all if you can just play their titles on anything else. And even more so, there's no incentive to even do that if you can just play their exclusive games on the PS5, on the Nintendo Switch too. So I really just do not understand the strategy of Xbox at the moment, and it's such a shame to see because they did have some fantastic exclusives like Halo, Forza, and of Gears of War, of course. So I really hope they get their act together and something changes soon. If not, I don't think we're going to be seeing another Xbox console. In the worst timing ever, rumour has it that there will be a PlayStation State of Play this evening, just as I'm recording this podcast actually, or shortly after the conclusion of the recording of this podcast. So it's terrible timing, and hopefully we'll be able to do a reaction to the State of Play for the next episode. Believe it or not, but Nate the Hate is back again. He is the same person who predicted that there would be a reveal of the Nintendo Switch 2 a few weeks ago. He is the one who's predicting that at some point this month there will be a PlayStation State of Play, and that is possibly going to be tonight. Into too much speculation now because we'll probably cover this after the fact in a proper reaction video, but it's highly likely that we're going to get something new from Hideo Kojima, possibly a Death Stranding 2 trailer, or a new Death Stranding 2 trailer, because he has been hinting on social media this week, or showing on social media this week, that he is editing something that seems to look like a game trailer. And speaking of Hideo Kojima, we have now a release date for the upcoming remake to Metal Gear Solid 3, Metal Gear Solid Doubter Snake Eater, and that is 28th of August this year. It's finally coming. I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it. Apparently, it was leaked by PlayStation because the release date was accidentally added to the PS Store, which just seems like a bit of a terrible damp squid of a way to actually release or announce the release date for your title. So I think Konami kind of fumbled that a little bit. I appreciate it's not exactly their fault. It was a leak. It was a mistake, presumably on PlayStation's behalf. But yeah, considering this will be their standout title, Konami's standout title for 2025, I think it's pretty bad form that this got leaked in this way. I think there should have probably been a little bit more fanfare. And yeah, bit of a shame. But yeah, looking forward to playing that on the 28th of August. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 has taken the world by storm over the past couple of weeks. It's already sold over 1 million copies. I even noticed as well that it was featured on the front page of the BBC News homepage, which is incredible for any game, let alone this game, which is not a AAA gaming title from one of the major developers and publishers. So fantastic achievement to them, and a solid well done to that team there. The reviews for this title have been absolutely solid. I think they range between the the high 80s and the early 90s. An incredible achievement. I haven't managed to jump into this game yet. If I'm going to be completely honest, I'm not a huge fan of first-person games. Never have been. Only jumped into Skyrim after the fact later on, when you could actually play it as in the third-person mode. Never been a fan of first-person. Never enjoyed games like Fallout because of that as well. However, though, very tempted to jump into this because everybody is loving this. Luke Stevens, who I mentioned earlier, one of my favourite YouTubers, he's played this game to death, and he said it's one of his favourite games of all time, and it's no mean feat considering how he can be quite sceptical and have quite high standards of games sometimes, and very critical, and I mean that in a positive way. So that is quite an achievement for them to get his thumbs up. We are still due to receive GTA 6 by the end of the year, by the end of 2025. You may remember in a previous episode of this podcast, I questioned whether that would be the case, whether we would actually get GTA 6 this year, but apparently they are still expecting it, so we will see. There has also been a huge discussion over the past couple of weeks about the price of GTA 6 upon launch, and if you may remember in the first episode of this podcast, I talked a little bit about how I reckon that it could possibly end up being pushed all the way up to $99 at launch. I don't think that they will step beyond that. However, I do think it's a very real possibility that it could be up to $99, and I think people will accept it. For many casual gamers, which in honesty is who Rockstar and Take-Two Interactive are trying to appeal to here, that is their mass audience here. It's those people that do play games casually, not people who are obsessed and consume the media like we do. They're the target audience here, and it's likely that those sort of people will probably only buy one, maybe two games a year. They've been waiting for GTA 6 for years. Yes, $99 is an incredible amount of money, and I would prefer it if they did not charge that much for it and signal to the rest of the gaming industry that it's okay to charge that amount. However, I do think people would accept it and just pay it, because at the end of the day, that is probably going to be, for a lot of people, one of the only games, if not the only game, they play over the year. So I wouldn't be surprised if this happens. And finally, I just want to give a very quick update on the Nintendo Switch 2 situation. I know you're all sick of me talking about it, but unfortunately I did not get selected in the ballot to test the Nintendo Switch 2 at one of their live events in a couple of months. I think I made an error. So I applied for the ballot for the Friday date in London at the Excel Centre. My theory behind this was, even though it was the first date that they were offering, that because it was technically a weekday, that a lot of people will be put off by it because they'd have to take annual leave at work. But now in hindsight, I think that I probably made a mistake doing that, and actually most people who will be trying to attend this event will be, hardcore Nintendo fans. So they would have no issue with requesting annual leave to attend this sort of event. So I reckon a lot of people thought the same thing and applied for the Friday ballot so that they could get in first, and I think I've probably missed out because of that. I should have probably clicked for the Sunday, because I don't think anybody would want to travel that far into East London on a Sunday, so I should have been a little bit smarter and applied for the Sunday ballot. But oh well, I'm looking forward to watching all of the many videos of people experiencing the Nintendo Switch at these events. I'm going to be very jealous, but I will enjoy watching that content. Let me know down below if you have applied for the ballot and you are successful, particularly if this was in London, and I'll be interesting to hear what your thoughts are of the event, and I'll be very jealous. And if you do have a spare ticket, I wouldn't say no if you invited me along. There is, of course, a worry at the moment that the US's new 10% tariff for all goods imported into the US from China, which I believe was introduced this month, is going to have an impact on the cost of the Switch 2. Obviously, a lot of manufacturing across the world relies heavily on China, including the gaming industry, of course. So a lot of people right now are a little bit worried that the Nintendo Switch is going to cost a little bit more in the US than it is elsewhere in the world, and perhaps maybe that will have knock-on consequences to elsewhere in the world as well. Who knows? I'm not an expert in this. Let's hope there is an exemption though, because I believe when Trump imposed a tariff on Chinese goods in 2019, the video game industry, at least video game consoles and certain technology and certain toys, were exempt. So let's hope for our American friends that the same thing will happen this time as well. And on the point of pricing, there has been so many rumours and leaks about the potential launch cost of the Nintendo Switch 2 that there's almost no point in trying to talk about them in any way, because so many of them just seem like fake and nobody really knows, and there's no credible sources at the moment. You keep hearing stories about Costco employees leaking cards from their system, or titles from their system, showing a potential Nintendo Switch and the launch price of it, and things like that. None of them are really credible at the moment, but I think it probably will be around the $399 mark. I don't think it was in $399 US dollars, that is. I don't think Nintendo will push it any further than $400 US dollars. It really would surprise me if that's the case. I wouldn't be against it if they pushed it towards the 500 mark to make, to ensure that it's a really high quality machine that, is powerful enough to play a lot of the third party titles that the Switch 1 missed out on over the past few years. But I guess we'll see very soon. What's quite funny about a lot of these rumors as well, of these leaks that have come from the various establishments, is that a lot of them contain a lot of spelling and grammatical errors as well, which really makes us question whether these are legitimate leaks or not. And I imagine they're probably not going to be, but we'll find out soon enough. The PlayStation Network was down over parts of the weekend, leading to a lot of speculation about whether PlayStation had been the victim of a cyber attack. The PlayStation Network seemed to go down on Friday night, which is really bad timing. I believe at the time the message said that it was down for maintenance, which obviously everybody was kind of scratching their heads and wondering why PlayStation would have maintenance on the PlayStation Network during Friday night, probably one of their busiest nights of the week when people have got back from work and just want to play some games with their friends. So a lot of people are speculating that this is probably a cyber attack. The PlayStation Network was back up and running, I believe, later on Saturday. Obviously, the damage had already been done by this point. For me personally, I didn't really suffer much from this at all. I just found it a little bit annoying that an error message popped up to notify me that PSN was down every few minutes or so, which was a little bit annoying. But apart from that, I wasn't really impacted by it. However, there will be a lot of people out there, notably the multiplayer gamers, particularly those who wanted to jump into Helldivers 2 to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of that game, would have missed out on this as well. And if you think about it, it probably had huge repercussions in terms of revenue generation for PlayStation as well, because when the PSN network is down, or when the PlayStation network is down, you can't download content. You can't pay to download new games on your PlayStation. So that was basically a 24-hour period where nobody was purchasing or downloading PlayStation games through the PlayStation Network, which isn't great for them. Right, I'm going to abandon you all now to go watch the PlayStation State of Play, but thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Wicked Game Podcast. Let me know down below what you've been playing this week. Drop me a like, drop me a comment, and I'll speak to you all very soon.